Hello, and welcome to tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar is on a topic very near and dear to my heart, which is meditation. I studied and did mindfulness-based stress reduction several years ago and have been a pretty serious meditator for a long time. Um, and tonight we're going to talk about the science around meditation. We're going to talk about how genes impact meditation and give some suggestions. And I'm going to lead you through a very brief meditation just before the Q&A. So I'm very excited to have Dr. Lachlan Crawford here this evening with me. Dr. Crawford, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, likewise, I'm really happy to be here with you too, Dr. Steady. So I am a licensed naturopathic doctor in the Boston area, similarly a meditator myself, having gone through different seasons of exploring with different, kinds and types of modalities of meditation. And in my day job I'm director of a program at an inpatient psychiatric facility. So working on a hospital floor with folks who are really struggling with acute mental illness. It's actually part of my day-to-day work with people, and I can definitely say that it's a powerful tool. It's an exciting tool, and it's important to know that it's not a one-size-fits-all tool. So that's kind of what we're talking about here tonight, is how to really kind of engage it in a way that's going to be most helpful for you, and how can the genomics of the DNA 360 really open the door to getting the most benefit out of it. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Hopefully you will all take a minute to fill out our poll questions. That helps us to help you when we know what it is that you're looking for and what your experience is. And there's also a Q&A, so feel free to ask us any questions in the Q&A. And if you have your DNA 360 results handy, if you have taken the test, or if you don't have those pulled up, and please do download the app because it is the quickest and easiest way to just look at your genes and flip back and forth through reports. It's very quick and very easy. So without further ado, we're just going to give a couple of quick informative things about meditation, and then we're going to go through our polls and see what you have to say. So, meditation is one of the most researched mind-body practices for mental health. But as we were discussing, not everyone responds the same way. I don't know how many of you have ever tried meditation and may have only tried one type of it and thought, oh, I can't meditate. The number of times that I've heard that from my family and friends,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm just not a meditator. I just can't do that. And their thoughts about what meditation is sometimes are correct and sometimes are not so correct. So that's my little my little intro. Um, and Dr. Crawford, would you like to tell us any statistics quickly before we go through the poll?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some really great research out there, and there was a 2010 meta-analysis where they kind of collected lots of different studies and put them together, and they found that mindfulness-based therapy, so that's one type of meditation, can produce moderate to large improvements in both anxiety and mood. And this is looking at a number of different populations. Um, and it tells us that meditation is not just about feeling calmer, right? It's not just like a state in the moment or a state in the moment, but it also can affect our trait or long-term mood and mental health outcomes. So it can be really powerful in that sense. And we'll go into this a little bit more in a moment. Dr. Steady will go more into the actual mechanisms, but I just want to just kind of rattle off some of the mechanisms here of why mental health can be impacted by meditation and different types of meditative behavior. I'm seeing someone say prayer is also a form of meditation. Love that. Absolutely. It's a form of meditation. Um, there was a 2020 study that I reference in when I'm talking with my patients all the time, that it was really helpful in terms of looking at the biological mechanisms of why meditation is really helpful for mindfulness, for mental health. And it's not just sitting quietly and not thinking about your worries for 20 minutes is helpful for depression. It goes far beyond that. It can really change actually the structure of our brains, increase the thickness of different parts of our brains that have an impact on how our brain is interconnected. It can have an impact on something called the default mode network, and it can impact some of our neurochemicals that are going to have clinical impacts for anxiety and mood and memory and all sorts of things. It can also impact the physicality of our bodies in terms of our autonomic or our nervous system activation, or our sleepiness and kind of deactivation as well. So I don't want to go too much into this. We're going to go a little bit more into the mechanisms, but there's just some really great research out there that looks at, yes, it is helpful, and we are starting to know some of the mechanisms of why it's helpful.
Which is so cool, one of the interesting things about living in these times. So really quickly, just before I go over the poll questions, um, can everybody just put a 1 in the chat if you've tried meditation, and then you can put a 2 in the chat if you've tried it and you thought, "I just can't do it, that's just not for me." And feel free to put both. You can put 1 and a 2. But I'm just curious to see, um yeah, we've got a lot of 1s, some 1s and 2s. So we've got some experienced, people, and I guess maybe put a 3 if you've never tried meditating, just so we can see who's in the audience. Lots and lots of meditators. Prayer and Bible and grounding. Very good. All right, Vanny, may I please have the poll questions up? Feel free to keep putting things in the chat while I'm doing this, and Dr. Crawford will keep an eye on that while I go through this. All right. So our first question was, have you ever practiced meditation? And 53% said occasionally. 31% of you said yes regularly. 12% said no but interested, and 4% no not at all. Which meditation approaches are you most familiar with? And you could select all that applied. 76%, so a very significant chunk, mindfulness or breathing meditation. 47% guided meditation apps. 27% yoga or movement-based meditation. 14% transcendental meditation. And then a few of you had others that you added to the chat, which I think were some of the grounding and prayer and things like that, and 4% of you none. Number 3, how confident are you in using meditation as a tool for mental well-being? And 41% of you said somewhat confident, 38% said very confident, 18% said not very confident, and 4% said not confident at all. And what's your main reason for exploring meditation? 36% said stress relief, 27% improving mood and mental health, 16% better focus and productivity, 18% sleep support, and 3% general curiosity. And
Mm.
our final question, what do you hope to gain from this webinar? And most of you said insights into how my genes influence meditation outcomes. 32% a clearer understanding of meditation's impact on brain and mood, and 18% said practical tips for building a meditation routine. So, um, thank you so much for your participation. It really does help us to hone the webinar in the way that you're looking for. So, oh, sound bath,
Yeah, some really
nice.
interesting some
Yeah.
comments here. You know, I hear I think Shelley said you tried the Calm app but didn't like it. You know, that's an interesting one. I think the apps can be helpful sometimes, and they can be not hitting the mark for everybody. And the apps can be very different from one another too. So that's an interesting take. Sometimes the in-person or like just a self-guided one can kind of land differently.
Speaking of which, Dr. Crawford, there are a bunch of different types of meditation out there. So, would you like to go through what some of them are for our audience? Some of which were mentioned in the wonderful study that you referenced.
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, yeah, I dropped the link into the chat. It says that it's the biological mechanism study. It was done in 2020. And I think it's a really wonderful summary of kind of putting the many different kinds of meditation into categories, right? So kind of transdiagnostically, or just kind of how they're done, because there's so many different types, though they're going to fall into broad categories. So the 4 categories are, start with 1, focused attention. So these are the types of meditation that ask us to potentially sit quietly and train our attention a sustained attention on a single point. So that might be staring at a candle, that might be focusing on the breath, that might be repeating a mantra, right? That might be just doing one thing, chanting, right? Just something kind of in a sustained attention kind of way. And when our attention wanders, we're going to bring it back. And that is, a Vipassana meditation. Sometimes that can be a body scan, right? We're scanning for kind of looking for sensations in the body. And if our mind wanders, we're going to kind of bring it back. Body scan is also kind of mind body because we're engaging the body in that. Transcendental meditation fits into this. And like I said, mantras. So this is a really common type of meditation. And you can see how that can ask your cognition to do a sustained attention type of focus. And that can, be easier or harder for certain people based on genetics that we'll talk about. So that's the first one, is focused attention. The second one is open awareness and mindfulness. So this is, instead of kind of narrowing in into a single pointed focus, it's more like zooming out and actually opening and expanding your field of attention and allowing yourself to become aware of all things at once or many things, and just kind of opening up to, you know, going for a walk and kind of noticing things and quietly listening to the leaves rustle, feel the way your body moves, notice things around you. This kind of like meditative state as you're doing things, right? Instead of just one pointed thing, you're doing a lot of different things and letting yourself be mindful while you do that. So I think of that as a walking meditation, a listening meditation, sometimes a visualization. If you're walking or if you're visualizing something and you're engaging different senses, it can be an open awareness meditation. Third category is a mind-body type of meditation. So this is where we'd start to pull in things like breath work, kind of like altering the physiology or inviting in the physiology and embodying the meditation. So doing yoga, doing all sorts of breathing practices. Tai Chi would be part of this. Depending on how much you're involving the body, this kind of mind-body meditation is gonna involve some of the physicality. And lastly, this is kind of on its own little category, something called loving kindness or metta meditation. And it might actually involve prayer in this as well, because I think it's a type of meditation that's kind of generative. So in the sense of you're generating a feeling or you're focusing on a feeling. It's a little different from the focused awareness meditation, but you're kind of focusing and cultivating certain feelings within the self, be it gratitude or loving kindness or compassion or whatever it might be. And it's a meditative practice within that feeling. So those are the four kinds of categories that I would say that a lot of different practices fall into.
Thank you very much, Dr. Crawford. Um, and a lot of these have really solid evidence-backed benefits, such as reduced anxiety, lower stress hormones. I mean, these are measurable things, which is the exciting thing about being alive in these times. Improved mood, better sleep, reduced inflammation, and improved aging. That said, nothing is a cure-all, right? It can be a very powerful tool, but it's part of it's part of doing whatever it takes to make ourselves feel better. So it can be a very important part of a comprehensive way of managing health. And I'm going to take a moment to tell you a little bit of a funny story, which is that in part of my training, I had to do a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And I had never done one of those before. And I didn't get a lot of sleep because I was someplace strange in a room with someone I didn't know. Anyway, by night 9, I had it. And I was awake and I thought to myself, they can't keep me here. I paid for this. Like, I'm going to pack my stuff and I'm just going to get out of here. And what are they going to do? Like, lock the doors on me? And then I realized that I'm a kind of a heavy packer and that I would have to carry all of my stuff in the dark to my car. So I just stayed. And then it was great. It was just like sometimes you know how people get 3/4 or 9/10 of the way through something and just are like, have a moment of thinking this is not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I share that story is because I think that's the point at which a lot of people are like, I just can't meditate. Right?
Mm.
Is like that moment of like rebellion and restlessness, like our inner teenager comes out and is like, you can't make me do this. I don't care if it's good for me. I'm going to go out and do something else that's not good for me, you know? And so I just like to tell that story because It was part of the whole process for me. Is getting frustrated, is sticking with it anyway, and also knowing when not to stick with it, right? We
Mm,
have to know ourselves and what works for us and what doesn't. So I just wanted to take that brief break for
yeah.
hopefully a little bit of comic relief.
I think that's a great story. If you don't mind me just commenting, I think that's so illustrative of, the difficulties of meditation. We can tout out all of its benefits all day, but truly, we have to find the practice that's right for us. And very often early meditators or a lot of meditation practitioners talk about what's called monkey mind, right? Monkey mind is when we finally quiet down and actually start to pay attention to our inner worlds, the very first thing we're met with is how busy our mind is, right? If we're kind of working all day or doing things all day or occupying ourselves, we don't notice how busy our mind is. And it actually seems to get louder. The voices and all of the to-dos and all of the criticisms actually seem to get louder the minute we sit down. And I think that's illustrating a lot of folks when they sit down, they say, nope, nope, it's not for me. And I think it's so important to know when it's good to push through that and when to challenge yourself, or when you're just going to say, actually, this type of meditation isn't for me, or maybe I can find something that actually works with me better. So I love that story for kind of learning about yourself in that way.
So let's deviate from my ridiculousness and start talking about the genes, okay? And how they can impact um, one's meditation experience, or how, for some people, meditation might be so beneficial that it's worth sticking it out and finding the right one for you no matter what. For instance, BDNF, if you're looking at your report, it's most likely either in mood and behavior or sleep, depending on what you have pulled up. Probably I would stick with mood and behavior as a good report to have up right now. Um, and this gene has to do with neuroplasticity and resilience, and meditation helps boost it. So we know that exercise does, and we know that heat, like going for a sauna, does, but also meditation does. And this is especially important for those of you with AG and AA genotypes. And there was a 2020 study showing that meditation increases this. And the fact that we're able to study this, I just am so excited about. So, we do also want to keep in mind that the genes don't work. We're going to go through them as individuals, but that they actually work together. And one of the ones that we have to be aware of with BDNF is TPH2. And if you have both the GG of BDNF and TPH2, meditation um, can be particularly helpful for you, but you may have to be very specific in the type that works for you. You may do better with, I think, and feel free to give your input on this, Dr. Crawford, a walking meditation or focusing on things externally might feel more comfortable for you than just sitting and breathing or focusing on your thoughts. I don't and feel free to um,
Yeah.
comment on that.
No, that's great. I mean, we're kind of diving right into some of the really interesting gene interactions. But yeah, if we've got BDNF and TPH2 interacting in that way, and we can describe a little bit more about what TPH2 does as well. But when those two are working together in that way, yeah, I think a walking meditation or doing something a little less, just kind of like seated and focused. I think also one of the loving kindness or kind of generative prayer type gratitude meditations would be really helpful, because um, that genetic profile um, can have a learning profile where you're particularly sensitive to negative or difficult feedback or experiences. So that's called epistasis of those two working together. So actually intentionally focusing on positive experiences and generating those positive loving kindness feelings can be really helpful for those folks. We're getting some questions on what is the optimum TPH2. So let's just jump to TPH2 if that's okay. I know that this isn't
Please
necessarily next on ours, but
go right ahead.
TPH2 stands for tryptophan hydroxylase, which is the enzyme that helps us formulate serotonin. So serotonin is made from tryptophan, which is an amino acid which comes from protein. Our bodies make it. And that's an essential amino acid. We have to get it from our diet. We can't just make it out of thin air. So we eat some tryptophan and some protein. We're going to take that and through a series of steps, we're going to turn it into serotonin. The last step in that process uses TPH2 to turn the direct immediate precursor into serotonin. If TPH2 is lower functioning or it's not the wild type, we're going to have decreased ability or decreased flow in the production of our own endogenous serotonin. So that just means that we're going to have some mood sensitivity. So we may have a tendency to have a slightly lower mood or have a predisposition to some mood concerns. And we might have some mood instability. So when we have, and I'm just going to try and remember so GG is the less efficient genotype of that gene. So if we have GGTPH2, that is the less optimum. And I'm trying to remember, I think it's the AA version is going to be the optimum one. I just don't have that up right now. Is that correct, Dr. Steady?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that fact check there. So that's another one where if we're going to have, some serotonin deficiencies, and I'm not talking about this is out and out going to lead to depressive syndrome, but we're going to have potentially some mood instability, potentially some lower mood, potentially some tendency to focus on some of the negative pieces. And if you also have high BDNF, so this is where you might not necessarily think this is intuitive right away, but if you have low TPH2 and high BDNF, it means that we have a high learning ability, right? So we have high BDNF, high learning ability for that mood sensitivity. It actually means that we have a really a quick learning and a quick tendency to formulate memories based on that low mood. So therefore, we have a tendency to have a little bit more sensitivity to negative stimuli. Does that description make sense, Dr. Steady, or ask questions in the chat, folks, if that wasn't making sense?
I'm not seeing that it doesn't make sense. So it made sense to me.
Okay.
So we will go with that.
Yeah, someone just mentioned that 5-HTP helps with mood. Fantastic. So 5-HTP is a supplement form where it is that immediate precursor that can be turned into serotonin. So you're kind of supporting that gene through taking 5-HTP. So a little bit beyond the scope of, talking about supplements in this webinar, but yes, that's exactly the mechanism we're talking about, where we're supporting serotonin, sometimes through supplements, but meditation can actually be directly supportive of serotonin as well. In some studies, actually with monks, they've looked at there's actually a thickening of the cortical part of the brain, which can produce serotonin in these long-term meditators. So we can actually kind of boost serotonin and the serotonin tone, which means the all-day level of serotonin as opposed to the peaks and troughs, but it's just kind of like a higher baseline function of serotonin when we're meditating. So that's when someone who's got a TPH2 that's functioning less efficiently, or it's just not pumping out quite as much serotonin, if you've got a regular meditation practice, and here's where the long-term regularity of it is really important, you can actually have a boost in the tonicity of your serotonin, which is really great. So we've put together the BDNF and we've put together the TPH2. It feels like now would be a good time to talk about the 5-HTT-LPR because that's also related to the serotonin piece.
That makes sense to me. And this has to do with secretion and reabsorption. And so, if you have an SS or an LS, because they both function the same way because of the dominance of the S, then you're going to respond, for one thing, less well to SSRIs. And you may find it harder to let go of and move on from stimuli. And it can also affect circadian rhythm. So, this comes into play when you have an experience. That it might stick with you for longer. And this is where I think the one of the values of meditation in terms of um, not controlling the mind, but having choice,
Mm.
um, and regaining agency over a mind that might decide that that may have trouble letting go of something that has happened. And so having various meditation practices can actually help with recovering from experiences like that you may not want to keep continuing to think about. So.
I love that. I also, when I think about 5-HTT-LPR, I also think about sensitivity to stimuli and irritability. Actually, I think about like the attention to detail and irritability when like something's just not quite right, um, or things don't go necessarily as you expect. And actually, folks with SS versions of the 5-HTT-LPR, they tend to sometimes have a little bit more sensitivity to being distracted by stimuli, aka you sit down to meditate and the clock is ticking, or someone's walking by, or a car drives by and they honk. There's just enough stimuli to kind of distract you. That is a genetic profile that tends to be could be a little bit more sensitive to that. So in that sense, I would say potentially focused attention if you feel like you're up for that, but maybe with a white noise machine, right? Just to kind of drown out a little bit, or just make sure that you have a little bit of peace and quiet, that you're going to be able to do it. Maybe meditating when you're on the subway and there's all these noise and dings going off. Maybe that would be a little bit hard for that profile. So not to say it's out of the question, but just being aware of, how sensitive your genetic profile might make you to external stimuli, and then working with that.
And LL, to answer a question in the chat, is long, long. And so that's not the profile that we were just talking about. That's the opposite of that. And it should be a little bit easier for you to do the things that we were talking about than with the short, short.
Mhm. And just and we're not necessarily talking about our own profiles here, but I am a short 5-HTT-LPR. That's my own genetics, and I've found, you know, for what it's worth, I find that I am still a regular meditator, and I've just had to learn to work with that. And it may be that I get distracted more easily, and I build that into my meditation practice. I actually build in a little bit more self-compassion for how distracted I get. That's got to be a part of it. And so knowing this in part of my genetics makes me feel better about myself, because I'm not looking around and saying like, oh, why am I distracted more than everybody else when I'm on my meditation retreat, for example, right? So it's really helpful in just kind of like knowing myself, and then also picking the practices that would be more helpful.
Absolutely. If our knowing our genetics can help us with self-compassion, I feel like that's a huge, huge win.
Hmm.
Knowing and accepting self. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so we've covered the serotonin genes now. So should we move into to COMT and its friends?
Yes, let's move into Compton Friends. I was just reading something in the chat. Someone's asking about, can you repeat about epistasis with BDNF and TPH2, and what we should consider with meditation?
I think you put that in the chat, right?
I did, yeah. I just said, so if we have high BDNF and low TPH2, those two are going to work together to make us a little bit more sensitive to negative stimuli. So that's when I would point people towards the loving kindness, or metta or prayer type meditation. Gratitude journals, really, really helpful. When you drive home from work, think about two things you did well today and really focus on them. That kind of positive emotion generative meditation can be more helpful than trying to just like make the mind focus on one thing and potentially having negative experiences when we're not perfect at it. Great. I hope that clears that up. Fantastic. So sorry, Dr. Steady, you were saying, so we did the
No.
serotonin genes. We were going to move on to COMT. That's a big one.
Yes,
Okay.
because COMT helps to clear various neurotransmitters and a lot of other substances, actually. But paired with DRD2 with the dopamine or with ADRA2B, the different combinations of these genes can, and I'm going to very briefly just say something because I think we're going to go over that more later. You can get these worrier warrior profiles, and you can also, that's with the DRD2 gene, and with ADRA2B, this is where if someone has a lot of deletions, and a slow COMT, their stress hormones might stay in their system for longer. And so that's one of the really beautiful things about meditation is if you can regulate the nervous system, then your body can actually clear out those, even if it's at a slower rate, it will happen. Whereas if the mind is just going wild, then that just keeps the stress hormones pumping. And if you're slow at clearing them, that can be challenging. Um, so focus and uh, more of the worrier, thinking and not clearing them for with a slow comps. But then you also have the other side of the coin where people might be fast at clearing and not have a lot of dopamine receptors, and they may struggle with focusing on it, and it may not feel rewarding to them. And so it's like, well, what am I doing this for? I don't feel any different.
Right.
I don't care if my telomeres are getting longer. I don't even know what a telomere is, right? So finding a meditation for you is going to look different than someone who is just desperately trying to like calm down their stress levels.
Yeah, great. I think this one is really, going to illuminate a lot of people's experience with meditation. So just as a reminder, so COMT, as Dr. Steady said, that's going to clear dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, which are all stimulating neurochemicals. So if we have a slow COMT, those chemicals are going to stick around a little bit longer. And those are the folks who are really going to benefit from the calming type meditation. So deep breathing, potentially a focused attention. Slow COMT is going to be AA. So low COMT activity is going to be AA. Higher COMT is going to be GG, and in the middle is GA. So if you've got a slow COMT, those stress chemicals are going to stick around longer. I'm going to tack on another gene that Dr. Steady was talking about, the ADRA2B. ADRA2B is basically the gene that codes for the stop on your stress response system. It's on your adrenergic system, which is your norepinephrine, epinephrine system. So if that gene has a deletion, meaning it's not going to take that stop code as well, then your stress response system doesn't have that stop code. So if you put those two together, so you have your stress hormones stick around for a little bit longer if you have a slow COMT, AA COMT. And if you have ADRA2B with deletions, it means that we're not getting that signal to stop. And so that combination means that we're going to have an exaggerated, longer lasting stress response system. Those are the folks that are really going to benefit from the calming meditations. Someone mentioned Yoga Nidra. I love Yoga Nidra. It's really helpful for this kind of profile of just calm down, do some deep breathing, certainly some paced breathing, focused attention, kind of calming down. So I think that's just like a really great profile description. Um, in addition, what Dr. Steady was talking about was the kind of the opposite, is that let's say we have a fast COMT. So fast COMT is going to be GG. That means that we clear those hormones really quickly. That may be good if we're feeling stressed, right? So we're gonna feel the jolt of stress, but then we clear it really quickly. But that means also that we're not necessarily going to feel long-term motivation for things. If you're kind of like, okay, I'm going to sit down and do this, but maybe it's harder to stick with kind of mundane activities or just kind of repetitive things. You're going to actually need stimulation to keep you motivated. So that profile together is going to mean maybe you're going to need something that changes up a little bit every now and then. Maybe go for a walking meditation, maybe do a different type of style of meditation. Start with a new teacher, listen to a Dharma talk or some sort of a prayer meditation or something that could keep you a little bit more stimulated while still giving you that relaxation. I'm just diving into a little bit more detail of exactly what you were saying here, Dr. Steady. I don't know if you want to tack anything on, but I just did COMT and ADRA2B. You were also talking about DRD2.
Hmm.
Would you mind just expanding on that a little bit and how that might fit in?
Absolutely. But I do want to quickly tack on something. Well, there's one thing in the chat, which is what are the letters of ADRA2B? And it's described as one deletion, two deletions, or no deletions. And so the more deletions you have, um, the um, the less stopping is going to happen quickly. So that's what Dr. Crawford was talking about. And actually, um, one thing that I really like to recommend to people if they do have two deletions and yeah, so it would be DD, right? So it's 1D or 2Ds or no Ds. Um, and a slow COMT is actually maybe doing a little bit of shaking before starting a meditation, just to kind of, or dancing if you prefer.
I love
Whatever it
that.
is that's a little bit of just trying to clear that out and then trying to do a calming thing, I think
Yeah.
can sometimes work better because there's a almost like an internal shakiness, I think, that can come sometimes with that presentation that if you can actually shake it out, will enable you to be more successful um, in your endeavors to sit still or or be calm.
I love that. That's a great idea.
Um, so back to DRD2. This is about dopamine receptor, how many you have, how dense these are, and so if you have a lot of them and you're clearing dopamine more slowly. On one hand, it's one of the neurotransmitters that's about um, pleasure and reward and things like that. So that might stick around for a little while longer with you. But it also could lead to more of a worrier presentation where you kind of can't stop thinking about something that is stressful or negative, right? So that all of these things have their pros and cons. Nothing is bad, right? Like all of you are wonderful. So just it's just that at certain times things may be more or less difficult with different gene presentations. So that would be more what we call the worrier profile. Whereas the warrior might be someone, and so that's with an AA COMT and a GG DRD2. And on the way other side of the spectrum, we have the GG COMT and the AA DRD2, and they would be more of the warrior, where um, they have not that many, um, their receptors aren't very dense and they're clearing out quickly. So not much is they're not going to be worrying about very much, but they also might not be super focused for very long, and they may not respond with pleasure to things in the same way. So, whereas someone might be like, "Wow, that meditation was so awesome," if they're the warrior might be like, "What am I doing here?" This is what I was saying before. They might just not see the point in doing it. And so having different styles of meditation would be beneficial with maybe little goalposts along the way for someone who's more of the warrior type.
Mm, yeah, that's so helpful, right? Because I think we think that meditation is supposed to go a certain way, and if you know a little bit more about what's going on for you, you can understand your own response to it a little bit and not think, what's wrong with me? Because meditation is such an internal experience. So to kind of normalize some of these reactions to it can be really helpful. So thank you for explaining that. We have a question from Cheryl asking, DRD2 GG is worrier. Um,
With an AA compt, yeah.
mm,
And with a GG compt and AA would be more the warrior like um, not not worrying, just moving through.
that's great.
All right, we have a couple more genes to go through before we get to our little mini meditation. So what do we have left? We have MAO, which would you like to talk about MAO? It's related to all of this that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. MAO, it's one of my favorites. I talk about it a lot in mental health. So MAO stands for monoamine oxidase. Oxidase meaning it's an enzyme that breaks something down, and it breaks down monoamines. And what are monoamines? It is serotonin and dopamine. So those are two of the monoamines. Also histamine, I believe. But so we've got this enzyme that's going to break those down. So COMT also breaks down dopamine, but so does MAO. So it's kind of got like different pathways it can go down. But this is one of the only enzymes that's going to break down serotonin. So if you think about MAO, it functions a little bit like COMT in that if you've got a fast MAO, you're going to be breaking down your serotonin and dopamine fast. And fast is going to be GG. And then if you've got a slow MAO, so you've got a TT MAO, you're going to have the dopamine and serotonin kind of hanging out longer. So you're going to break it down a little more slowly. And you can kind of anticipate what some of those effects might be. If you're breaking down your dopamine and serotonin really quickly, maybe you're not having sustained experiences of pleasure or positive mood kind of hang on for a really long time. You might kind of have a peak of an experience and it kind of goes away really quickly. So it's hard to kind of sustain that experience, that pleasurable experience. And then on the flip side, if you've got a TT MAO, you've got a slow MAO, you're actually going to have more serotonin and dopamine kind of hanging around, but that can mean um, different things. So I actually have written down in my notes that this can actually lead to a little bit more rumination, the experience of kind of like hanging on and really hanging eh, words and thoughts kind of hanging in the psyche, just kind of like spinning around in our head. And it can be associated with some anxiety profiles as well. So when I think about MAO, I think about mood and I think about anxiety. So for TT, like I mentioned, we've got increased rumination and default mode network. Default mode network is something that I mentioned, excuse me, when I was talking about the mechanism paper. The default mode network is what happens in our brain when we're just driving home and we're not even really trying to focus our attention on something. It's just we're going to go into habitual patterns of the way that our brain has thought for 30 years or 40 years or 50 years or whatever it might be. And it tends to kind of bypass the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that is really conscious. And it just kind of goes in these loops. And sometimes they can be kind of fearful loops. So that increased default mode network can happen when we've got slow MAO, we've got TT MAO. On the flip side, we've got fast MAO, GG. We might have a little similar to some of the other genes that we've been talking about. We are less likely to maintain what's called a mundane activity. So unless it's stimulating and keeping us experiencing those peaks of dopamine and serotonin, then we're actually not going to stick with it. It's a little bit harder for us to maintain a focus on something that's not, really engaging our emotions and engaging our attention. So in a meditation, that might feel like what I was saying before, like listening to different teachers, having different experiences, maybe doing an open awareness meditation where you're walking and actually engaging with your life and in the world, as opposed to just kind of sitting and staring at a candle or like trying to focus on the breath, which may not be enough to kind of maintain the attention. So that's what I would say about MAO. Is there anything you'd add to that before we'd go on to clock?
No, but I'm wondering if our participants, how many of you maybe recognized something about yourself in our descriptions? Because a lot of you have tried to meditate, and some of you did put down twos, and some of you didn't. Some of you put down ones. But how many of you kind of recognized, oh, that's kind of what it's like for me to meditate? So if you recognized yourself a little bit, or yeah, just a yes, perfect.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's so
We see
normal.
you. We see you.
Yes.
We are
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
um,
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. It's just about building that compassion, finding a practice that works for you and kind of understanding yourself through the genomics and through lived experience.
And there's a reason it's called a practice,
Hmm.
right? It's
Hmm.
not called an expert. It's
Right.
called a practice. You go in and you're doing the thing.
Hmm.
Um, somebody was talking about how if you've ever watched a little kid learn to walk,
Hmm.
they stand up and they fall down and they do that over and over and over again. And it doesn't occur to them to stop, right? They're going to figure out how to walk sooner or later. And I understand that not all children have an easy time walking or can eventually walk, and I don't want to be insensitive about that, but just that there's a sort of joy even in the falling.
Hmm.
When it's a little kid, granted they're kind of close to the ground, so they don't really get hurt when they fall, like the rest of us. But in to go into it with sort of an open mind, like a childlike mind around it, instead of it being a task, having it feel more like uh, something that you're learning, something to experience with a little bit of joy in it. So
Mm,
that's my
beautiful.
that's my little plug for joy. Okay, now we'll get to the clock, Gene.
We've got a really great comment from Cindy
Okay.
here. I just want to highlight this. So MAO is GG, and I don't have the attention span for long meditations. I do well with short ones. That's a perfect example of a fast MAO, right? So meaning that you're clearing those monoamines really quickly. So you kind of need short bursts of things that are going to keep your attention. That's a perfect example of what to do with MAO GG. Good job.
And for you, doing a brief meditation once an hour to kind of reset yourself, that's
Mm,
like 1 minute might be it might be something that does bring you joy and feels really easy and makes you feel successful at it. And so really it's about experimenting until we figure out what works for us.
right.
Yeah.
Great one. Sorry to derail. We were just about to talk about clock.
You know what? I know where I'm going. It's okay. If we get derailed a little bit, I'll get us back on track. No worries. All right. So the clock gene, I'm sure any of you who have been to our other webinars around sleep know that this is one of the genes that we talk about every time that we're talking about sleep, and it helps with sleep cycles and circadian rhythms, and it is influenced by meditation. Um, so for those of you who might have the CC version of this, you know what you've probably learned is that your circadian rhythm can be easily interrupted. You have to be really careful with sleep hygiene. You can have that tired and wired thing going on. And if you have that, evening meditation is a perfect thing to do to kind of bring everything down, help clear out the any stress hormones that you've had during the day. Um, and you may not want to do it in the morning. You may instead want to do it at night. Although some people find themselves being woken up by meditation. Like they feel more awake afterward and more refreshed. And in which case, do it in the morning instead, right? So it's once again about finding your own particular rhythm. Sometimes focus like that. If it's focused, you might want instead a guided meditation or um, a story at
Mm,
night that can or an evening prayer or like the um, yoga nidra is a great one at night for people to focus on.
mhm.
Um, Whereas if you have the T alleles, you don't have as many issues with circadian rhythm, and you also may not be as likely to. Some people get sleepy when they meditate, right? So figuring out when you get sleepy and utilizing that versus and not doing it when you want to be awake is really the key here. And genetics can impact what this looks like for you.
Great. Yeah, I would say, certainly with C alleles, if you're doing it in the evening, it can be really helpful for kind of reducing the cortisol that you've got throughout the day, especially if you've got a profile that, you know, where you're able to kind of clear those stress hormones in the evening, and that can actually support your evening sleep. But then, as Dr. Seti said, if you're finding that the meditation is waking you up, then listen to your body and figure out a time that works for you. But I don't want to say it's there's certainly no rules, but C alleles tend to be a little bit more evening birds, night owls. So having a little bit more meditation to send the signal to your body that it's time to wind down can actually help the circadian rhythm um, in the evening just kind of calm down.
Absolutely. And I see something in the chat. Where do I start if I don't have the info you discussed? So the information is in the DNA 360 report. That's one of our tests that we do, and it can be really helpful for everything from cardiovascular things to how much you should exercise, what you should eat, and everything that we're talking about on tonight's webinar. So you can find that on our website. I think there's probably a link somewhere in the chat because our wonderful people who help us with these are really good at putting things in the chat.
It's already
So,
there.
yeah, perfect. So, thank you, Vanny and Katie, for all of your help. All right. So, we have a few more minutes before we get to the questions and our little meditation. Where would you like to go from here, Dr. Crawford? What feels like the most important things that we have left to talk about?
Wow.
It's
Free
gone by
time.
fast, right?
It's gone by so fast. I just want to just take a minute and just talk about meditation. about how there truly are so many different styles. And I think a gateway, there's some really interesting talk about how certain meditation styles that came from Eastern practices, they were adapted to cultures that that maybe didn't necessarily have the same culture that if you're listening from the West, the Western culture that's now adapted some of these meditative practices, they were evolved for different cultures, is what I'm saying. And what some meditation teachers have found is that it's really important to infuse self-compassion, because I think this is a culture that can be very self-critical. We can be very in our heads. We can be very um, internally focused in a lot of ways. So, and I wasn't necessarily planning on saying this, but just, if you're saying what's something to focus on, we're talking about meditation. I just want to say it's so important to just infuse everything that you do with a sense of self-compassion, with a sense of, I'm trying this. As you said, Dr. Steady, it's a practice. And just letting yourself be gentle with exploring and learning from the genes and learning from your lived experience. So yeah, that's something that I would have mentioned just to kind of infuse it. And I'll say it actually as we're about to go into a little bit of a short meditation too, is just saying, like, if it's not your cup of tea, that's okay. You can take a break, you can step away from the computer for 3 minutes. But it's we're here to kind of learn about it. And so I just wanted to give that plug. Yeah. Is that something you experience, or you're also a meditator, so I'm curious about how that lands with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that.
Mm,
Um, I think that there's a lot of stress out there and a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves, and um, a lot of achievement-oriented things.
yeah.
And so having something that feels more like a creative outlet than something that is a means to an end. Even though we're talking about the benefits, it's really how you get there that gives you the benefits, not the getting there that gives you the benefits, right? It's
Mm,
it's really about the journey and the things that you can learn about I mean, I learned so much about myself, not all of which, I was psyched to learn at the time, but in the end, I was happy that I learned them through meditating. Um, and I just want to quickly reiterate that there are serious health benefits, and not just for people who are already, feeling healthy and just trying to get healthier. There have
mm,
been studies on people with coronary artery disease, and there were reductions in anxiety, depression, and stress, and that's good for people's blood pressure, and it's good for inflammation and things like that. And programs for chronic pain have been very successful in lowering pain symptoms and increasing mood and ability to cope with pain. That's one of the things that the MBSR training that I did at UMass Boston, um, that was their whole thing, was to try and help people with pain and anxiety and things like that. And they did a lot of study on that there. And so these are definitely tools as part of they can be part of pain management. They can be part of stress management, as well as um, just enhancing um, relationship to self. I think all of those things are true at the same time. So I think
mm.
that's important to know. All right, so
Beautifully said.
thank you. I've got my little 3-minute meditation, and I'd like to preface this by saying, if you are driving, please mute me, or operating heavy machinery, or working with sharp tools, or near a hot stove. Those aren't usually part of disclaimers, but I added them. And if you start to have feelings which are overwhelming or uncomfortable, you can feel free to just open your eyes and look around the room that you're in and come back to the present moment. And maybe do some light tapping down your arms and legs if that feels good to you, to just really remind yourself that you're here now in the present moment. Okay. All right. For those of you who are not driving or near a hot stove, I'm going to ask you to find a comfortable position, either sitting or lying down, and allow your eyes to gently close or soften your gaze downward. Take a moment to notice where you are right now, the surface supporting your body, the temperature of the air around you. Begin by taking 3 slow, deep breaths, and with each exhale, let your shoulders drop a little lower. Feel the weight of your body settling into this moment of rest. Now, imagine roots growing from the base of your spine, extending deep into the earth below you. These roots are strong and nourishing, connecting you to the steady, no pun intended on my last name, supportive energy of the ground beneath. With each breath out, allow any tension, worry, or discomfort to flow down through these roots and into the earth. The earth can handle whatever you need to release: stress, any fears about your health, any feelings of exhaustion. Let it all drain away. As you breathe in, feel the earth's calm, healing energy flowing back up through your roots, filling your body with steadiness and peace. Above you, imagine a warm, golden light beginning to form, like the gentlest morning sunlight. This light carries healing energy specifically meant for you. Watch as it expands outward, creating a protective dome of warmth around you. This golden dome extends about 3 feet in every direction, in front of you, behind you, to your sides, above and below. You can hear a soft, gentle humming sound, like distant wind chimes or a quiet lullaby. This sound creates a beautiful barrier that keeps stress and worry outside your healing space. Feel the temperature within your sanctuary becoming perfectly comfortable for you. The air here is clean and fresh, carrying the scent of lavender or of an ocean breeze, whatever feels most soothing to you right now. Within this sacred space, healing energy swirls gently around you like a warm, supportive embrace. You might sense this energy as tiny sparkles of light dancing in the air, or feel it as the softest silk fabric gently moving around your body. This is your space of complete safety and restoration. Nothing harmful can enter here. Only peace, only healing, only love can exist within this golden sanctuary. This space continues to nurture you with its perfect environment. Feel how the golden dome gently pulses with each of your breaths, growing slightly brighter and more protective with each exhale. This space is entirely yours. Here, you don't need to worry about anything outside these walls of light. Your body can rest completely in this cocoon of safety and healing energy. Take a moment to appreciate this healing space you've created, this sanctuary that exists just for your well-being and restoration. You can return here anytime you need healing, peace, or simply a moment of complete safety. Now, in your own time, begin to wiggle your fingers and toes. Take a deeper breath. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. You can return to this healing sanctuary anytime you need it. It lives within your imagination, always available to provide you with peace and restoration. And now some questions.
I just want to say thank you for that, Dr. Steady. That was lovely. Stacy said that was beautiful. Yeah, very well done. It was just really nice and grounding. I wonder how people found that, if they were kind of absorbing any of that information we just shared. And if you have thoughts and questions, please put them into Zoom for us to see. Let's check out the Q&A.
Hey, if the CEO can do it, all of you can do it.
And she did. So a question, I'm just going to start with one at the top. Are you good with that, Dr. Steady?
Absolutely.
Good stuff. So Shelley asked, grounding would be considered which of the four types of meditation? So grounding practices like, there can be certain physical ones like pressing your feet into the ground, literally just walking barefoot, lying on your back on the ground and feeling the support of the ground. There's all sorts of them. Tapping, as Dr. Steady was saying, kind of bringing yourself back into the present moment and really kind of anchoring you and your nervous system here and now. Lots of different ways that we can do that. What kind of a meditation would that be? I would say probably something like a mind body, right? Because we're really trying to bring our body into the same place as our mind. So yeah, I'd say it would probably fall into that category, although it's not explicitly mentioned in that paper. Would you agree, Dr. Steady?
Yes, that's where I would put it. Yep,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there you go, Shelley. I think it would be mind body. Do you want to go ahead with the second one there?
absolutely. Susan's asking, which insights can our genes provide to us in meditation requirements and abilities? Specifically, which genes are we looking at right now? Can our genes predict abilities?
Mm.
So, I think this question was probably asked like as we were starting to go into all of the gene work that we went through. So, Susan, I'm hoping that you got some answers. And if you have a specific question about, uh, I don't like this type of meditation. What would you recommend for me? Then feel free to put that further on in the chat. But I think we went through a lot of different genes, and for us to go through all of them again would probably make the rest of the questions not get answered. So, thank you for asking, Susan.
Okay. Thank you for that. Let's do, Lisa was asking, what is high BDNF? Just for clarifying that, high BDNF is going to be GG BDNF. Yeah. Answer live. Okay. And then Susan is asking TPH2 is GT. What does that mean? So if a profile is GT TPH2, that means we have one wild type or one fast and one slow. Typically, that means we have a slightly impaired enzymatic productivity. So we're going to have some of the symptoms or some of the outcomes of the slightly decreased serotonin outputs that could look like susceptibility to low moods, could look like susceptibility to anxiety, could look like susceptibility to variable moods. Yeah, that's what we're looking at. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So we have a question from Leon. As a layman, how do I choose the best method of meditation?
Ooh.
Well, I would say to do a little experimentation. Um, be a little bit of a scientist about it. You could start out, one day with one type and one day with another type, and then see how you feel about it. Um, so you could do one that's seated and you're focusing on your breath because it's really easy just to, count in as you're breathing in and then count again as you're breathing out, paying attention to how the breath feels on the way in at the various places, nose, throat, chest, stomach, and then on the reverse, and see how you do with letting your thoughts come in and float out again. And then you could do a walking meditation where you're walking along and instead of having all of your normal thoughts, you're noticing what's outside. That's a tree, there's a building, and you're just noticing. You're not putting judgment on anything. You're not letting your mind tell you stories about what you're seeing. You're just being really present with your body and how it feels when you're walking and with what's around you, and see how you feel about those two. Or you could really pick any of them. Basing it on your genetics based on our conversation might be a good guide for you, but I don't know your genetics, so I just kind of picked two things that are relatively easy to accomplish anywhere and chose those. Um, those of you on this webinar are going to get a little bit of an inside scoop, especially those of you that stayed for the Q&A, which is that we are going to, in the new year, hopefully pretty early in the new year, be having an aspect of our app that's going to have a meditation portion of it. And so you can play with some different things in there. So, um, if you can wait until the new year, Leon, then you can also experiment in our app. But those would be two places you could start for right now.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. We've got some questions. I'm looking both at the chat and also looking at this new section. It looks like we have a profile, a suggested profile. So we've got a COMT, we've got a DRD2, we've got an ADRA, we've got a 5-HTT-LPR, and we've got an MAO, TPH, and BDNF. So we have someone's entire mood and behavior profile. The question is essentially, so any ideas? I'm not sure, Susan, if you're asking about just like general mental health or meditation suggestions. How do you read that, Dr. Steady? Just trying to read this.
Um, I uh, I read it as for brain health,
Mm-hmm.
um, keeping stress low and getting happiness.
Mm,
Um, so maybe which type of meditation might be good for that. And you had talked a lot about I'm not going to analyze someone's entire gene set. That would be more appropriate for a one-on-one phone call, not to do in front um, of an audience, really.
mm,
Um, but the one that you mentioned, where you're focusing on the positive,
mm.
either as prayer or gratitude or loving kindness meditation, might be a really good place to start in terms of specifically meditation for joy and happiness
Yeah.
and lowering stress. That's the one that jumps out at me. Does anything else jump out at you?
I mean, I was just trying to like potentially take a little bit of a look. I mean, I noticed that BDNF is high, ADRA2B in the middle. Yeah, like I said, it's hard to kind of do an entire profile kind of on the fly like this. But I think, yeah, sorry,
No, no, go ahead.
I think focusing on I mean, you even said it in your question, add more joy and happiness. Um, there's really wonderful studies that look at, there's a practitioner that I love named Kristen Neff, also Christopher Germer, wonderful practitioners, done a lot of really substantial research in gratitude and loving kindness meditations where if you're really, sitting gently, and this can be a simple meditation where you sit or you find a nice comfortable place and you actually find a memory or a physical memory of like, what did it feel like the last time I felt true love and joy and appreciation and just like this like warm buttery kind of love for something, and you can engender that even just by thinking of like holding a puppy in your arms, like, or watching puppy videos. Literally you can just kind of say like, oh, that feeling in your chest when you go, and you generate that, and that's the meditation, that's the focus of the meditation. You hold on to that and you say, this feeling, okay, here I am with this joy, I'm able to feel this joy. And you can actually start to learn to direct that feeling of loving kindness and joy, and start to repeat phrases to yourself or to others and say things like, you know Dr. Steady, if I were to send you some loving kindness or some metta meditation, I would say, may you be well. And I would really focus on that. Like, I really would love for you to be well. May you be loved. I really want you to be loved. May you feel safe. Okay. And may you find joy. And you sit with that emotion and that feeling, and then you can start to turn those emotions towards yourself as well, which is a really powerful part of metta and loving kindness meditation, where you're practicing feeling these emotions for self and others. And actually, the research says that over time, that feeling becomes much more natural and just starts to come out of you at more often times, right? More frequently. It's going to start to be a more natural part of the habit of your default mode network that I was talking about, the way your brain works, if you practice it more often. So I love that. Just kind of giving a cursory glance to some of your genetics, if you've got a high BDNF, you might be able to, kind of really sustain the benefits from that, because you're going to be able to learn and kind of lay down new neurons that are going to actually make that pathway in your brain. So I think I would recommend, if you've got the whole profile, maybe a one-on-one call would be helpful for you to kind of really get detailed answers. But just as a kind of Overall answer, I think a loving kindness meditation practice, prayer, gratitude journal is a great place to start. Yeah, absolutely. Joy, happiness, it does all of those. Yeah, so thanks for that question. That was great.
We have a question from George. It sounds like knowing a person's gene expression could also suggest what general professions they might have natural advantages and disadvantages in, giving an idea of which ones to explore. And I think that that is absolutely true. Uh, some people are better at hopping from task to task and then going back to them and, getting interrupted and being able to flow with that. And some people are better at, you know, diving so deeply into something that it's almost like the rest of the world doesn't exist. For instance, those are two of the things that I think of when I think of some of the genes we've talked about. And so, yes, if you know your genetics and you can put that together from your mood and behavior report, it can really help people to not try to put themselves in a situation where they're not going to thrive, right?
Mm,
And instead find a place to be in their profession and in their life where they can thrive. And I think that that's a good goal for humans in general is to not try and fit a square peg into a round hole, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. That insight, right? We're talking about health outcomes, we're talking about meditation, but of course, certainly the more you know about yourself, and you can integrate and kind of understand and work with yourself, go with the grain of the wood. I think there's plenty of benefit to be had in lots of spheres of life. Yeah. Question from Nancy: is qigong in the same category as yoga and tai chi? I would absolutely say so. Yeah, qigong and tai chi are cousin practices, very similar, and extremely beneficial. We actually do qigong in the hospital here with patients. We love it, and I would say it's certainly a mind-body practice where we're incorporating breath, we're incorporating movement. There's a high degree of embodiment happening, and it's very meditative. So yeah, absolutely, I would say that. Yeah. Um, So a question from Leon, what about psychedelics as an alternative to require the brain? That may mean to repair the brain. I'm not sure. There might have been a mistype there, but using psychedelics, um, a little bit beyond the scope of this particular webinar. I don't know that we're allowed to per se comment on psychedelics, be they not legal in all states. But there is a lot of research happening in psychedelics and mental health. There are some, experts out there that have a lot of experience in talking about, you know, um, mental health and wellness and optimizing mental health using psychedelics. And I do encourage you to check those out. One resource I can mention is MAPS. MAPS Canada. I think there's a MAPS US as well, just for a little bit more information. But yeah, I think that's the extent that I can necessarily comment on in terms of psychedelics for this webinar. Yeah.
Yep. And then we have a question from Stacy. Are bedtime stories considered a form of meditation? I think that's because of a comment that I made. And so what I would say to that is if you use them as a guided meditation, they're a guided meditation, right? If you're focusing on them, they are not per se a form of meditation, but a story that you listen to that calms your mind, that makes you really present in the moment, and that winds you down can be meditative. And so it can either be a segue into more traditional meditation, or you can call it a meditation if you like that better than listening to someone doing a body scan,
Hmm.
because it's about being present and about um, letting the thoughts that you have about the story just kind of pass through and not start telling your own story in the middle of the story. So it depends on how you interact with the bedtime story, whether or not it could be considered meditation. You may have a different opinion about that, Dr. Crawford, but that's how I see the um, one of the goals being if we were to be goal oriented about it is being present with what is. And so being present with a story, being present with another person can be a meditative act.
Yeah, I would agree. I would completely agree. Yeah. And I think it does depend, if we're doing it as kind of like distraction, white noise to not think about what's going on for me and my body, or just to kind of not be present, right? That's a way that actually some of the tools that we have in our lives can take us away from our present experience. But I think if you're using it in an intentional way of like, I'm going to lower the lights in my house. I'm going to make a cup of chamomile tea. I'm going to gently, start to move towards my bed. I'm going to sit. I'm not going to look at my screens. I'm going to use this as a very intentional, I'm going to engage with this practice and let myself kind of start to fall asleep. I think absolutely it's a meditation. It's about being aware. It's almost like an open awareness meditation where the focus, what you're being aware of is the story, and you're letting that come through to you and help you be sleepy. So yeah, I would say that, even though it's not technically one of the, classic traditional forms of rigorous meditation, but what we're talking about is finding something that helps you for your health and for your own experience. And if a bedtime story is helpful, then by all means. A tip for that is that I have a podcast that I love to listen to and actually play it for the patients here sometimes. It's called Bedtime Stories. And it is, they literally just tell bedtime stories, and they tell it once and then they tell it again, so that it's almost like this trauma-informed story meditation where you know what's coming. So it's not like you're not listening to find out what happens. It's just like a very slow way of repeating a story in this very calm voice. And you know what's coming. So it's not stressful. It's like rewatching a TV show that you've seen 100 times. It's like very calming in that sense. Um, and I
I
really
like that
love it.
one too.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I
You've
like
heard of
that
it.
podcast. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Nice. Okay.
Well, that brings us to the end of our questions for this evening. Dr. Crawford, do you have any final comments or suggestions before we end our webinar this evening?
I just want to make sure that we're not missing anything in the chat, but I think we have some broader questions um, that I think it would be good for us to, talking about general mental health, adoption, and things like that. Potentially for us to think about in another podcast, but I don't want to leave anybody hanging. But just to try and stick to the scope of the webinar and really paying attention to the genes that we've shared. I think we went through the genes individually, which I think is really good to understand, what each of them are doing. But truly, as you said at the beginning, it's about how they play together and how they're going to create a response that we have. And then also you've got to put your lived experience on top of it too. So you're really understanding, like, if you don't love, an audio podcast because that is not your thing, that's okay, because you had an experience with that or something. Um, so, a final plug for go into this with compassion, go into this with an open mind, go into this with a little bit of beginner's mind, we call it, right? Like maybe we don't know what's going to happen. And try out different practices, and use your genomics as a tool to kind of understand and continue to cultivate that compassion for yourself is kind of where I would wrap up, and just say it's been a pleasure. And meditation can be a really strong tool. And yeah, I'm just glad that we had this platform to be able to talk about it together with genomics, which is just such a neat combo. Yeah. So I think that's where I'd leave it for today. How about you? Any last words before we end here?
You said everything so beautifully. I think that trying to remember to be light about it, um, you know, uh, to and with oneself, like you were saying about self compassion and beginner's mind. And I think there's also an aspect of it can be kind of funny, right? You're thinking about what you're doing, and I'm like, I'm staring at a candle, right? It's okay to think it's kind of funny and to keep
Mm,
it light, because sometimes that is something that's needed in order to allow the process to take hold. Is if you're feeling stuck on something, don't be afraid to find it a little absurd,
mm,
and move on from there. Because I
mhm.
find that really helps me if I'm feeling stuck in something. So
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. Humor can be so healing, Yeah, and meditation doesn't have to be so serious. Yeah.
right, right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Crawford, for joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.